You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody. Hey guys, welcome back to the podcast. You're listening to Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the Camino de Santiago edition. Well, I've taken my break, I've seen my family, and I've been back to England for a football match, which we lost. It's time to get on with hiking. I love that break, though I'm not entirely sure it's done me any favours as far as the hike's concerned. It probably helped with my feet, so that's a blessing, but I've landed back on trail away from anybody I knew. I know that's obvious, but I've been coming to terms with that over the last couple of days and meeting new people, and already I feel more back into it. But it wasn't easy to make that transition back to hiking from basically 6 days of having the ball doing something else. We've got 3 days to talk about right now, as well as a conversation I've had with Dave Santee on the Appalachian Trail. Dave has reached and now passed Harper's Ferry, the traditional and emotional halfway point of the AT. He's already walked over 1,000 miles, which is quite an achievement in itself. He's regained his mojo and he's hitting his stride again. We'll hear from Dave after my first 2 days back on the Camino. So let's start there and hear about the day number 22. Day number 22, Leon, mile 287.6, to Virgen del Camino, just mile 292, a 4.4 mile day. That sounds far worse than it actually is. My alarm went off back in England, remember, at 3:15 a.m. and I jumped out of bed to make the 4 a.m. shuttle back to the airport. Naturally enough, I don't know why, I was just faffing around again, and in the end it led me to rush around like a maniac to make the 4 o'clock shuttle, which I did make. The flight took off on time and I arrived in Madrid on schedule at 9:15 a.m. I needed to find the metro to get to the Madrid Chamartin train station, and that's where it started to go wrong. I was pointed in all sorts of directions to find this metro, and it took me about half an hour to eventually find it, which I did. And I made my way to the rail station via the metro, but I was unable to get on the train that would have got me to Leon just after lunch. I could have booked it online earlier in the day, but I just forgot to do so. The train was fully booked when I got there, so I had to get a ticket for the 1:03 p.m. train, which would get me to Leon just after 3 p.m. My initial idea of 10 miles on the afternoon seemed to be fading, so I did what any weary traveller would do. I grabbed a bite to eat, a coffee and a beer. I was sitting around waiting for notification of which platform my train will be on until about 5 minutes before departure. It was then a mad rush with a large queue to get everybody on the train. Fortunately, I think we all got there. It was another super fast, comfortable journey, and it just sped by. In Leon, I took a cab back to the cathedral, set my pack up properly and started walking. Once again, I crossed the river on the southern point of the city and was quickly into, I think it's called Tabac el Camino, a somewhat less salubrious part of town. The walk was very straight with traffic all around, though I'm used to it by now whenever we leave the city. And the ground started to rise and got my heart going again a little bit as I headed out towards Virgen el Camino, which was going to be my probable stop for the night. While taking the path through an industrial estate, there were still green views to the right, so I was looking forward to getting out into the country again. At Virgen del Camino, I walked past bars and hotels, but it wasn't until I saw a sign for the municipal albergue to my left that I realised it was off trail. It was only a few hundred yards off trail, and I decided to call it a day there. Frankly, I think the journey getting back from England to Spain and then the train journey as well, they're kind of tiring, and I'm an old guy, so why wouldn't I be tired? So I'd done 4 miles. I felt pretty good about the 4 miles, and I was happy to be calling it a day. And you know, it's funny, I also felt when I got started walking again, I felt like I'd almost gone back to the beginning. I felt like almost a newbie, despite I had 300 miles on my legs. All my friends were ahead now, and I'm meeting new people. And at the moment, of course, you know, it didn't feel the same. But I was sure I would get used to it. And already now, you know, just a few days later, I've met people that I like them already, and it feels like the same vibe as it was before. But at that time, I just felt like a newbie that I really hadn't done anything on the trail so far. Strange feeling, and I'm wondering whether or not I should ever interrupt a hike in that way again. When I checked in at the municipal albergue, which was a donativo, by the way, I met and introduced myself immediately to Anthony, a British guy of about the same vintage as me, though he turned out to be about 5 years younger. He and his friend Yutaka, a Chinese guy, were heading out for dinner. I asked if I could join them, and probably because they felt they couldn't say no, they said, yeah, sure, come along. And Anthony wanted to see a church in the village, and I'm glad he took me there. It was a modern church, which for Spain seems incredibly unusual. And it was magnificent in its own way. And we went there, and I, as I always do, I go in there and sit in the pews and just look at the beauty all around me. And even though it was modern, it had the same sensibilities as an old church, and it did inspire that feeling in me that being in a church, which is a quiet, reflective place to be. We wanted to eat properly, but unfortunately the various kitchens in the restaurants hadn't opened yet for a full menu, so we had to make do with beer, cake, and a bocadillo. The albergue was very clean, and the bathroom is scrupulously clean. I slept fine, and the mouthguard also stayed in. How about that? So I don't think I woke up anybody with my snoring. But that's the end of day number 22. Day 23, Virgen del Camino, mile 292, to Hospital de Obigo, 309.5, a 17.5 mile day. I think I mentioned at the end of the last day, the mouthguard stayed in all night, and I slept well. I was obviously getting used to it, and nobody accused me of snoring, which of course was always the idea. People started stirring at around 5:30 a.m. and I just hung around in bed until about 6:15 before getting up and going about my day. The two volunteers who were looking after this albergue were so friendly and completely unable to speak English. But why should they, by the way? I'd understood from them the previous evening that there was no breakfast. However, Anthony came back into the room to tell me that there was breakfast available. So I packed quickly and went and had a bit of toast, some jam and coffee and orange juice. Pretty good start to the day. As I mentioned last night, this is a donativo, and I put about 20 euros into the tin, which seemed quite reasonable to me. Leaving the albergue behind, I headed back to the trail and pretty quickly had a decision to make. I'd been looking at the maps, and there was the route which took us constantly beside a busy road all day, or there was an alternative route which went south. It was about 3 kilometres longer, but it would be quiet. Even as I approached the turnoff, I hadn't quite made up my mind, but I turned left because, after all, this is an adventure. So why not go the path less trodden, something like that. I couldn't see anybody else turn left, so I felt that I may very well be on my own all day long, and pretty much was. We had to cross a couple of busy roads initially via bridges before being fully in the country, and I approached Oncina del Valloncina and saw my first and only two hikers of the next 15-odd miles. At the edge of that small village, I passed them, filled my water, said Buen Camino, and then went up the last small climb of the day into a nice wide path about 20 feet across with what I think I refer to as manageable stones. By that I mean they're not actually tearing my feet up entirely, and so I was okay with that. All around there was scrub and a little bit of wheat, several trees, nice open views, and of course the wildflowers that you seem to see everywhere here. One of my concerns about coming in this way was that we expected a moderate chance of thunderstorms by 2 p.m. I constantly check the weather to see, the radar particularly, to see if there's storms coming in. And way off into the distance, I could see dark skies, which was kind of reflected in the weather forecast I saw, the radar that I was looking at. But I was feeling happy that I made the choice to come this way. I still love that solitude, and I'm not mad about the straight roads anymore, but I still love that solitude. And the dirt path continued for a few more miles before coming to a small village in which I saw what looked like 2 mothers and 4 daughters sprucing up a bit of greenery in the street. I saw absolutely nobody else in that village, and then I was on the road again. The road led all the way into Villa de Mazarif, and it was kind of a decent-sized town, I suppose, and I was expecting at least a coffee and a decent breakfast. But realising there were none in the path because I could see the end of town was coming, I asked at a mini market and was directed back to Cafe Tio Pepe, which was off the trail, but worth going back to because I wanted something. There were still no other hikers, and all they had to eat there was a tortilla, but it was very tasty, so I had that and a cup of coffee. The road out of town was another of those arrow-straight, quiet roads that seemed to go on and on forever. And I think it was at this point that I was pretty much done with this straight road thing. I found it a little depressing to be passed by one of the few vehicles that passed me all day, only to continue seeing it way in the distance 10 miles later, still in my view on the road. There's something, as I say, a little depressing about seeing that van, knowing it's taken 10 minutes to drive there, so you're probably going to take about 2 hours to get to where that van was that you could still see. My God, it was straight. I was walking down the left side of the road facing whatever traffic was coming towards me, and as I say, there wasn't much. And just off to the right of the road was a small stream, and the frogs were making a hell of a racket. So every time I went across to see them, they all shut up. I played that game a few times just to amuse myself. You'd be walking along, and there was this huge noise going on. I'd just walk across, and they must have seen my shadow or something. They all went totally quiet until I moved off again, and they started making a noise again. Now, you may be thinking at this stage that the straight roads are playing around with my mind and I'm going a bit crazy. I wouldn't say it was quite right, but you know what I mean. But after miles of this straight road, it was something of a relief to be diverted through a small village in order to avoid crossing the train tracks that were coming up. Now, I don't know if the high-speed train crosses here, but I can understand why they would wish to avoid pilgrims wandering across the tracks with a 180-mile-an-hour beast hurtling towards them. The village was Villavante, and I was delighted to see that there was a very convenient bar just as I entered the small town. I took advantage of the facilities, enjoying a beer and an open sandwich as I took my boots off and let my feet air out. I knew that I still had 3 miles to go, so I wanted my feet to be in as good a condition as they possibly can be. And in checking the weather forecast again, there didn't appear to be much chance of the storms hitting us within the next hour or two. But I wish they'd told that to the storms themselves, because I was dallying, of course, for about 45 minutes, and as I got up to go again, a crack of thunder greeted me back to the path. It was still some way away, but it certainly made me up my pace. So I'm flying along at about 3.25 miles an hour, and the alternate was coming to an end, and I rejoined the trail and my fellow pilgrims as I entered the town of Hospital de Obrigo over this remarkable 200-metre-long bridge. I'd forgotten that this was this medieval bridge that I remembered so clearly from the last time. I'd just forgotten it was Hospital de Obrigo. There was even a jousting arena to the left to emphasise the medieval nature of the place. And somebody had told me today that there was actually going to be some jousting going on this weekend, but of course I'd actually missed that. And I made it to the Albergue Hidalgos through the town with seconds to spare as the heavens opened. What a find this place was. There's a sitting area with a bar, never a bad feature, and a whole new bunch of people to meet. I'd requested a bed in a 2-bunk room, so just 4 people in the room. In the event, it was just me and Elizabeth, a young lady from Hong Kong, in the room. The facilities were scrupulously clean again, and we sat down to an excellent communal dinner. I met Martha from Ireland, Kylie from Australia, Elizabeth, of course, another young woman from Singapore, as well as Patricia and her daughter, Carmen, who live in Tampa near me. I can't help feeling, and I may have mentioned this before, that women are totally dominating the trail this time, probably by 2-1, I would think. I think this is a great development that women are taking to the trails, quite unlike my first 80 through hike, when men must have outnumbered them, 3, maybe 4-1. Although, as I often remark, in terms of 80 finishers, the proportion was much closer to 50-50, because men always screw up and take risks they probably shouldn't, while women are much steadier hikers. I really could not recommend this place more highly, and I hope that people include this albergue Hidalgos in their planning when they do their Camino. All the time I was having dinner, my poor Dana was frantically trying to get hold of me. I got back to the room, grabbed my phone, and could see that I'd missed 4 messages and a call. I realised why. Dana's tracking me where I'm on trail and saw that I'd stopped at Hospital de Orbigo. Without checking further, she assumed I was actually in hospital. I called her immediately to set her mind at rest. We had a good laugh about it. But that was the end of day number 23. That was certainly quite a big second day. I was a bit disappointed I couldn't get more miles under my belt on that first day, but being able to get on the train 2 hours earlier really screwed me with my plans. But I was determined to get out of Leon. I felt that I needed to do that to get back on track, and I was able to achieve that, so I don't feel too bad about it. I've got friends coming out to join me just occasionally for the last 5 days, but I think I've now slipped back to a finishing date of about 14th of June in Santiago. I'll then have a day with them, or a day and a half maybe, before I then head back to the UK and then back to America the next day. So the plans are working out, but not quite as I'd originally imagined them to be. Now, let's hear from Dave Santee as he has pushed past 1,000 miles on the Appalachian Trail. Hey, Dave, how are you?
Good morning, Mighty Blue. Doing fantastic. Thank you.
Well, you're doing fantastic. Is the good news story, obviously. But the last time we spoke, you were actually zeroing in front royal, and reading your notes, you had a bit of a damper day out than your first day out, didn't you? Than you'd hoped, and then even worse, you had to set up in the rain. Tell everybody what that's like, because I remember it's a bloody nightmare.
It is. It was 2 days in a row of rain, and that day had rained all day, and so you get to your site and whatever, drop your stuff, but there's nowhere to hide, right? I mean, there's no shelter, so you got to pull all your tent gear out, lay it out. My tent is a Durston, one person that allows you to pitch it fly first, so
Yeah.
your inner doesn't get wet. So but everything is soaked. You get this fly up, then you kind of hide underneath the fly, trying to put the inner together, put all your stuff under the fly. It's tight and it's cramped, and everything. Not everything doesn't get wet, but everything is wet or moist or damp, or you bring moisture in or water in. But once it was set up, and I was inside, I stayed dry, and the tent is good for that. I think the worst is not worse, but it's just as bad getting out in the rain, because you kind of try to get all your stuff together, get packed in your tent, get everything that goes in your pack while you're in your tent, except for the tent, and then you have to come out with your rain gear on and try to disassemble your tent, and then even worse, you get all this wet tent gear. I don't have any space on the outside of my pack for it, so I've become a plastic
You went dead. You went dead there, Dave.
tent gear, which is in its own stuff sack, but it's wet into a plastic bag to get it into the pack, so it doesn't get everything else wet in the pack.
Right. Yeah. Well,
You're constantly fighting that.
I know that when I I had to set up very quickly in the rain once, just before it rained. I was just really rushing around. First time I went, and I got in the tent, zipping and unzipping, and jumped inside. And I was on my elbow, sort of thinking to myself, "What on earth are you doing, you silly old fool?" And this bloody great red spider got in with me as well. Oh my God, it was huge on my arm. Yeah, I'm afraid that
there are those
didn't last
moments.
much longer.
There are those moments when you question your sanity out here, right?
Yes.
It's like, what are you doing out here? But that's part of the deal.
Yeah, I mean, 6 months or 5 months, whatever it's going to be, you're going to be questioning your certainty quite often. I couldn't tell you. And the rain carried on all night, but the next day you ended up at Bear's Den Hostel. What do you think of that?
That was a nice respite. I wasn't expecting it. I wasn't intending, right? I figured it'd be another night in the wet. And I had planned my day out, and I noticed on the route that a half a mile after where I'd intend to stop was this Bears Den hostel. It's run by the ATC. It's an old stone house, fairly, it was somebody's like summer mansion, summer place. And they've got it chopped up and broken down into a hostel. And it turned out great. And they had a kind of a almost like a trail magic dinner. Somebody come in and cooked hot dogs or chili dogs for
Nice.
everybody. Otherwise you can pay a little extra. You get a pizza for dinner and some breakfast, and so it's either way it worked out great. I had
Didn't you
the
get Ben
chili
and
dog and all
Jerry's?
that
Didn't
for
you get
dinner.
Ben and Jerry's?
You do get ice cream too.
Oh,
And
that's the
yes,
one.
I think it was a Ben and Jerry's. It was
Yeah.
actually pretty good. Yeah, exactly.
That's when
So that that
I discovered Cherry Garcia for the first time then.
there you go. That's good stuff.
And you got lucky with your bed that night because you said, and I didn't know this. There's two levels, and downstairs was full up, so that you got upstairs. And there was just two of you upstairs.
Yeah, you walk in from the downstairs level into this sort of narrow space with maybe 8 beds, and it was damp, it was wet, it was smelly, there was every bunk was full, and it was cramped. And I'm like, I walk in, I'm like, oh darn. And and the person running, I said, no, you can move upstairs, but you have to wait till 5 p.m. I don't know, I, the way they run the thing.
Really
Um, and it was like 4:45, so I waited 15 minutes, went upstairs, and sure enough, like you said, a nice big room, not plenty of space.
nice and spread out.
Not cramped or damp like the other one was. So that worked out actually.
And I know
It
that,
was a good.
and I know they've continued the tradition of make your own pancakes in the morning, which is absolutely
Yes.
wonderful.
Yep. Yep. That was fantastic. I sat at the grill, made myself, I don't know, a dozen, whatever it turned out.
Nice.
And then so it makes it an easy stop because you get fed night and morning.
That's right.
And it was like it's $40 for a hiker special, so it includes the room, the pizza, the ice cream, and the pancake breakfast. And it turns out we had the chili hot dogs and all that as well. So
Well done.
I actually didn't eat the pizza, and I told them leave it for another hiker who comes in who doesn't want to pay for the or can't pay for the
Nice.
special. Kind of pay my pizza forward, I said.
Yeah.
So
Very nice. And somebody will have that and their own, no doubt, at
yeah,
some
yeah, no,
stage.
yeah, no
So,
doubt.
so that leaves you 15 miles, 20 miles into Harper's.
It was 20, almost 21. It was
Uh,
but it was intended from that, to push into Harper's, not take 2 days.
uh,
And I was excited. And I wanted to get in before the Conservancy headquarters closes at 5 p.m.
right.
Um, so it wasn't the hardest miles we've done, but it was a solid day. About halfway through, I was met up with a young guy named Boomer, who I've actually hiked with, going all the way back to Fontana Dam.
Amazing.
Lost him for a month and a half or so. Ran into him the day before. As I went into Bears Den, he ducked in and then said he was moving on and went forward to the there's another spot run by
The
the
Blackburn Centre, isn't it?
Blackburn. Yeah,
Yeah.
the Blackburn, exactly. He went to Blackburn. So then I headed out fairly early, got past the Blackburn, got to about 11 or 12 o'clock, sat for lunch, and then he showed up when I was sitting there. So we hiked together for the rest of the day, and he kept a good pace. And so, when I've got a pacer like that, it helps me. I mean, I can keep the pace, but when I'm alone, I tend to walk a little slower.
Do you know, it's interesting. I've found the same thing a couple of times on this trip. I've almost needed a tow when I'm
Yeah,
hiking
yeah,
with somebody who's slightly faster than me, and it really helps me keep moving. So I'm sure that worked for you as well. So you went to
exactly.
did you get to the Conservancy on time and get your picture taken?
Yep, yep. We got there 3:30.
Oh,
Got the
blimey.
picture taken. And here's an interesting number. So I'll give you some numbers, which I'm a like number guy. Um, when I checked in at Amicalola, I got hiker number 647.
Right.
Um, Checking in at the ATC headquarters, I got 282. So,
Wow.
yeah, so that's a big,
Wow.
yeah, big spread between there and here. So
Do they think you've is that because you're fast, you think, or a lot of people have dropped out?
if I were to observe what I can tell, they don't really know. They didn't comment on it. They're not even really happy about giving out these numbers. It's sort of an internal tracking thing,
All right.
but they'll tell you what it is, and they write it on your picture, or they
Yeah.
write it somewhere. Anyway, my observation would be it's a combination of both. I'm faster than a lot of people out here, and the usual number of people are dropping out.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So because most of the time I'm polling the people, not polling, but ask the people who I run into out here, hey, when did you start? Most of them started after me. Which
Mm.
means what I'm doing is I've got the faster people, the people who are really trying to move fast with me and ahead of me. But I've already passed all the people that started before me. I'm running into nobody that started before me.
Wow.
I mean, it's certainly possible that you know, there's 281 people ahead of me that checked in before me,
And
but
maybe you're going to
but
start seeing some of the what they call them? Not yo-yos.
the
Flip
Sobos.
floppers. Flip floppers.
Oh,
Sorry.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. In fact, ran into at least 3 or 4 since Harper's Ferry, which we haven't
Nice.
gotten. I mean, since we're talking about Harper's Ferry, 3 or 4 of which have started in Harper's Ferry with their flip flop. And the funny thing is none of them have really thought about it. And I gave them all the same piece of advice. I try not to give any unsolicited advice if I can avoid it. It's my nature, though, kind of the dad thing. Um, is is when they get the Katahdin, I keep telling them, flip all the way back to Springer and hit the Smokies in September. Don't hit the Smokies in November. I mean, why do you want to hit the worst weather, when the winter's starting to set in the
Yeah,
highest and most, worst part of the trail? And they're like, hey, that's a great idea. We hadn't thought of that. It's like,
it's a good
I,
idea. It's a good
yeah,
idea.
I just surprised that if you're going to flip flop, you hadn't considered that. Everybody's going, oh, I'm going to flip back to Harper's and head south. Well, okay, do
And
that, but yeah.
and then you got the C&O Canal, which is the probably the easiest couple of miles on the trail, and then
Yeah.
you start moving up a bit as well. You said you only took 2 days in Maryland. I know there's 3 state challenge, which is ridiculous to do 42,
Oh, yeah, yeah. No, no, no.
42
Hey,
miles. That's a bit over the top. But so I did you enjoy Maryland? I remember the
I
first time thinking it was dead easy, and then the second time I thought it was not as easy as I'd remembered.
It's probably I'll go with your second opinion. It's not as easy as you might say, "Oh, this is easy." You wouldn't call it easy. Um, but you know what? I'll tell you, I loved Maryland. I everything since we got the Harper's Ferry and out of Virginia, the different clubs that take care of the things, that the shelters are different, the signage is different. It's just cleaner, it's nicer, and it's maybe a function of the fact that we're hitting, places that are closer to the edge of humanity, so to speak,
Yes, yes.
easier to get to, trail maintainers and all that. But the trail has changed, both but really in a lot of like the way it's maintained. The shelters are much nicer. I mean, I've run into shelters with tent pads that had gravel and nice square gravel tent pads that are
Mm.
set up. It's like wow, a hiker's campground in Maryland. So, with a bathroom and again tent pads that's right on the trail. So I enjoyed Maryland. Pushed through quickly, mostly to get to Penmar Park.
So you get
uh,
pizza. It's pizza at
so I can get a
Penmar.
pizza.
Yeah.
Exactly. So the second day in Maryland, I was planning to do 18 miles, and would have put me about 6 miles short of Penmar, which is roughly where the Mason-Dixon line is, right when you cross into Pennsylvania. It's
Yeah, that's right.
Penmar, Pennsylvania, Maryland Park, Penmar. And I've been hiking in and around another couple of hikers for the last few days, and one of them said, "Hey, if we push forward," I checked into, "we push forward to Penmar Park, there's a pizza place that delivers to the park," and we're like, "Ding, ding, ding," there's the prize, right?
Isn't it funny
So
how everything's about food?
yeah, it is. So we pushed 24 miles a day. It wasn't a hard day from like, terrain and oh my God, this is the hardest day we've ever had. But you do 24 miles when you're expecting 18, and it was cold and windy. But yeah, we got the Penmar Park, got the pizza, sat against a building, even though it's full of pavilions and picnic benches. It was cold and windy, so we sat against a restroom building wall to be sheltered from the wind.
Yeah, yeah,
As perfect hiker trash too. Three
absolutely.
hikers
Quite right too.
sitting on the ground with box of pizza in your lap, keeping your lap warm. But
Magic,
yeah, that was good.
absolute magic. And
Yeah.
and talking of food, you then of course you got to Pine Grove Furnace State Park, and
Oh yeah.
when you told me you were going to do the half-gallon challenge, I told you it took me 28 minutes, and you
uh,
then I don't know if you remember this. You sent the message. You said it took me 29 minutes, such and such. So I
yeah.
took a few minutes fiddling about with my pack. Well, that's a terrible excuse, by the way.
It is true, and I hadn't thought about your 28 minutes. I started. I was about 2 minutes in. I'm like, oh, I got to grab something out of my pack, and I went to my pack. I fiddled around with it. I came back. but I wasn't really thinking about doing it in some kind of record time. Record time's 3 odd minutes, so let's just,
Is it really? Is it
I
really?
swear to God, there's a sign up, there's a picture of a guy, and you got this hard block of frozen ice cream that it takes you 10 minutes before you can get through the top inch of it. I don't understand how, but it wasn't my intent to do it quickly, to like, hey, it's a race and see how quickly I can do this. I decided to eat it quickly because you kind of stay ahead of your stomach and your brain that way. You don't get you don't
Well,
get as sick of what you're doing and as full of what you're doing.
well,
So
I didn't. I was desperately ill that night, and I put pasta on top of it. It was a bloody nightmare, and I didn't do it a
oh,
second time.
I
But
had a
you,
cheeseburger and fries
oh, did
after.
you? Oh my God!
Well, 2 or 3 hours after. Let's be clear. We got there. About 3 p.m. and I ate around 5:30. But yeah,
Oh dear.
but we did. Speaking of food, we picked up the day after the pizza and before the Pine Grove. Ran into a park like. As I've been noticing in Maryland, Pennsylvania, you also pass through like little state parks, like picnic ground areas.
Yeah.
And there was a guy there doing trail magic, former hiker, had a barbecue set up, and he was feeding hot dogs. And literally, you'd walk up and he'd throw hot dogs in the grill. We sat down, and I ended up eating 4 hot dogs. This is like 11 a.m. the day after eating the pizza. 4 hot dogs, a couple of bags of chips, a Gatorade, 4 or 5 of like these little Debbie type snack things, a sleeve of Oreos, and a thing of Nutter Butters. And he's like, keep eating, take as much as you want, take stuff with you. And I mean, it must have been 3,000 calories worth. Then
You
I had
wouldn't
two
have
pieces of,
dreamt. You wouldn't have dreamt of doing this a few months ago, would you?
oh, of course not. And then I had I had finished all but 2 pieces of pizza, and I intentionally left 2. I said I'll eat them for lunch tomorrow. Well, I had this, so I didn't eat them for lunch. So then I had the pizza for dinner. But yeah, it was.
Classy.
It's been a food fest lately.
Bit of a food frenzy. And now, and you stayed in a place that I recall so well at Boiling Springs, right next to
Yeah.
the rail track. And I know that, and I wrote about it when I wrote my story about my book about the AT first time, that I woke up when the train came through at 4 in the morning, I think it was, and I literally
Yes.
flinched because I thought it was coming through my tent. It was so bloody noisy. Did it go
Yeah.
coming through the night again?
Well, so first, it's a beautiful campsite. I mean, the town sets up this lovely spot. It's in the kind of a small glade with
Yeah,
grassy area.
that's right.
We got there, I don't know, 5 p.m. So had dinner. The first train came through was about 8:30. I'm like, okay, great. And
Right.
boy, yeah, it's like right there, and it's blowing the whistle because apparently you're only about 100 feet from a road crossing.
Yeah,
So it has to blow the whistle when it gets to the road crossing. So it's
that's
blowing
right.
the whistle multiple times. Then another one comes through around 9. I'm like, okay, oh boy, this is frequent. We'll see. And then I put some earplugs in and I got to sleep. And somewhere in the middle of the night, I thought I heard something. And I slept through the entire night. Not completely. I woke up a bunch of times, but the train never woke me up.
Yeah.
And then I was awake at 5:30, and then about 5:45, a train came through. I didn't have the earplugs in, and boy, if you needed an alarm clock, for that. And then again at like 6:15,
Oh,
so
dear.
or 6:30. So, but then one of the hikers I was with mentioned. She said, "I said, did trains come through last night?" She said, "Are you kidding? It was like 5 or 6 of them." I could not believe that I had managed to not hear them with
I
the
can
earplugs
hardly
in. I
believe
mean,
it. I tell you,
I,
mate.
I'm shocked, but boy, it's an experience, and
It sure is.
it's part of the experience. So it's
And
kind of
so,
fun.
and so you've left Boiling Springs now, and I said
Yes.
to you earlier on when we were communicating earlier that that was the day I did my marathon, 26 miles into Duncannon. Are
Yes.
you going to try that or not?
No, I thought about that. It's 26 from Boiling Springs to Duncannon. It's only like 2,800 feet of elevation gain,
Yeah,
which over
yeah,
26 miles is
yeah.
it's
Fine.
almost dead level. The plan had been to go about 15 miles to we're in this kind of Cumberland Valley
Yes.
crossing. And apparently there's very little. You can't stealth camp, you can't tent. I mean, there's a shelter at about 15 miles. I'm like, I'll stop there, which puts me about 10 miles short or so of Duncannon.
Right.
And then I'm gonna hike through Duncannon tomorrow,
Good
another
choice.
8, 10 miles. No, I'm going back though. I'm gonna go 8, 10 miles north, grab a shuttle, go back to Duncannon, and spend the night. I need a zero. I'm about 11 days out, and I may even zero in Duncannon. I know it's kind of like, shrug your shoulders and why, but it's a place and it's in the right time zone for
Yeah,
me
yeah.
to do
I
it.
tell you what,
Yeah.
though, Dave, you're about to hit the rocks of Pennsylvania.
Yes.
From my
Yes.
memory, it was. you go through Duncannon, the long straight road, then you turn right, and you go then across the Susquehanna River on the bridge with all this
Yes.
traffic roaring about you. And then you just head up the mountain and you think, oh, that's great, it's nice and calm now. But oh my God, that's when the rocks really start getting you. So you're about to hit them. So, when we speak next week, you will have had a week of Pennsylvania rocks. So
Exactly.
all I can say is good luck, buddy.
Well, I appreciate that. I know, and that's exactly kind of where I'm at right now. About 10, 11 days out from the last zero, my feet are a bit sore, and I'm thinking, and the rocks have been beating me up already. I mean, we all know out here that the rocks don't start in Pennsylvania; they just
No.
intensify. They intensify, and it's been pretty bad. Other than the last day or so for the rocks, and my feet have just been killing me,
Yeah.
the bottoms, and
Yeah.
and so taking that extra day in Duncan ahead of where it's going to intensify is probably
A good move.
important for my
Yeah.
recovery and
Yeah.
to keep going.
Yeah, you have to keep giving
Yeah.
yourself some recovery time because otherwise
Yeah.
you're going to struggle. Yeah. Okay. Well, look,
Yeah.
I'm glad it's going well still, and I'm interested now. I'm looking at my notes. This was all about the food, so keep eating, keep eating, my friend, and just keep putting those calories on. All right.
Yeah, will do. Thank you.
All right, buddy. Take it easy. Cheers.
You too. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
What a difference a few weeks make, eh? Dave is fully back on track now, and bad weather notwithstanding, he seems to be back in the groove. Getting to Harper's Ferry is such an important milestone in every AT hiker's journey, and getting your picture taken there and your number recorded is a real sense of accomplishment. Though I do remember the first time I went there was a relief map of the Appalachian Trail. In fact, it was the entire Appalachian Trail, and I looked at where we were on the map and looked at how far we had to go. Oh my God, it looked bloody impossible. I don't recall that map being there the second time I went. They probably didn't want to frighten the hikers. Now let's get back to the Camino and hear about today, which was day number 24. Day 24, Hospital de Orbigo, 309.5, to Astorga, mile 319.9, just a 10.4 mile day. I had a fairly good night's sleep because with just two people in the room, there were none of the usual disturbances. As usual, with my normal faffing about, I was the last to leave. I still do not understand why this happens. It happens on the AT, it happens everywhere I hike. Everybody else seems to be able to get ready quicker than me, and they all seem to be in a hurry, and I appear not to be. Breakfast was provided, which of course I had, and I eventually got out at about 8:15 a.m, literally the last person to leave yet again. This time, the alternate was the path that went straight ahead, and the main path went to the right, and avoided most of the roads. The forecast was for no rain and temperatures no higher than 68 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 20 degrees Celsius. And I decided to go to Astorga, which was only about 10 or 11 miles, as I needed to do my podcast and speak with my lawyer regarding my crash a few months ago when I was hit by that car. I haven't talked about that much on this trip, though I've certainly felt the impact in my back as I've neared the end of each day. Getting 15 miles done is no big deal, but the aching starts around this point. When I had an MRI, there was new disc damage, so I knew that I might get some pain, but by carrying a light pack, I think I've managed that pain pretty well on this trip. I haven't noticed any problem with my neck, and I put that down to the excellent rehab that I was having prior to coming away. I was absolutely determined not to let the accident impede my hike, though I'm aware that my timings have slipped a little and that I won't be able to get to Finisterre as I'd originally hoped. Nonetheless, I don't regret making this hike because what you're going to do? You've just got to keep moving forward, and I intend to do just that. I'd already had breakfast, but when I reached Villares de Orbigo, a cafe promised eggs and bacon, fried eggs and bacon no less. Now, as we all know, everything is better with bacon. I heaved off my pack, got in line, waited patiently, licking my lips, only to find they didn't have any bacon. Oh my God. The anticipation of bacon and not getting it was far worse than even thinking about it in the first place. The pack went back on and I headed off again, totally unreasonably pissed off that I hadn't had any bacon. And suddenly, the topography changed. The path started to edge upwards. It wasn't difficult. It was simply different from what we'd had for, a couple of weeks now. I knew that the days of flat walks and long straight roads were over. I soon came to another village about 3 miles in. I stopped for a coffee and a tortilla, unfortunately no bacon, And leaving that village, I started to climb again and entered a farm road which curved regularly and cut a swathe through the hills. And I realised that this was what I was craving once more. The Meseta, which I'd really, truly enjoyed, was in the rearview mirror now. Leon had kind of interrupted the hike with, obviously my interruption going south and going to watch football, but also the industrial nature of the town and its surroundings had made the walk not as pleasurable, I think. And here it was, the Camino I'd been yearning for, with more physical effort, more changing views, and plenty of pilgrims to wave to, and no straight roads. It felt like my Camino had moved on to another stage. We had some good extended climbs, and my heart coped very well with this, never reaching more than 130 beats a minute. There was a Donativo on the way that looked like a hippie commune with fresh food and coffee and just a good vibe, really. I took a couple of slices of melon, milled about with my fellow pilgrims for about 10 minutes, then dropped a few euros in the tin and resumed my walk towards Astorga. I must say, and I found this before when I was on the AT as well, when I have a short day, I find it really hard to motivate myself to get a move on. I'd managed to book a very reasonably priced penthouse apartment, no less, in Astorga, and my check-in time for the apartment wasn't until 3 p.m, so I knew I didn't have to rush. Unfortunately, when I don't have to rush, my lazy gene kicks in, and I find myself going slower than ever. I nearly always slowed down and stopped for any chance for a coffee and a bite to eat. Consequently, I've been grazing throughout the day and enjoying the hike with no hurry to get anywhere. Just outside of Astorga, well, about 3 miles outside, there's a stone cross with a great view of Astorga in the background. I stopped and had my picture taken. I remember doing that with Emma a few years ago. And then I obliged others by taking their pictures as well. And then we had to go through a small town, which I guess is a suburb of Astorga. Naturally, I stopped again for a coffee and a croissant before doing the last couple of miles into Astorga. One last obstacle to encounter was this bizarre green bridge, which massively overcomplicated getting across the railway line. If I can try to imagine this, you go up incredibly gentle slope, about 4 times it turns back on itself. You're going up very slowly and up very slowly. It must be about, I don't know, 1/4 mile long, this bridge, to cross a railway line. I've never been on one like it before, well, other than the last time I came here, of course. But yeah, it seems to be an awful waste of steel to get yourself across a railway line. I stopped in a plaza, of course, for lunch. I knew I had time to waste now. I couldn't check in till 3, although they eventually let me in a bit earlier than that. And there was the plaza was set up beautifully for this guitarist and a girl singing, and it was lovely to sit there, have a beer, and can't remember what else I had actually. Yeah, a couple of snacks, and while I was there, I bumped into Patricia and Carmen again, who I'd met at the previous albergue. I told them I'd mention them in the podcast because I'd seen them again. Hey girls, how are you? Eventually, I got into my apartment, had a quick sleep, and started on the show that you're listening to now. So that was the end of day number 24. So that's it again for this week. I'm back, and I feel like I'm back. I've been thinking about it this evening, and it's only because I've met these new people on the trail. I've come to think in recent years that it isn't necessarily the hiking that I love, it's a community of hikers among whom I find myself. I am extraordinarily comfortable with them, and I hope they are with me. We each meet one another as equals, men, women, young, old, because we're doing the same thing, we've done the same distance, and we're going to the same place. That commonality of interest is what makes hikers resonate so much with other hikers. Once again, I hope you've enjoyed following along and also, of course, hearing about how Dave and Beth and Andrew are getting on. If you recall from a week or so ago, Dave was missing community. Now that he's finding it again, all is well in his hike. There should be a lesson for all of us. I'll see you next Monday.